Let's give me like a countdown or something. Hey, welcome everyone. So we're here again at my apartment. We're doing our first live broadcast. We're going to be taking some questions. I have a guy off site kind of helping send me questions as you send them. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. I have a computer here, so I'll be able to keep track of it. And wanted to go over a few different points today in the meantime. So I'm sure everyone's by now seen news of this Seattle CHAZ site, as they're calling it, this Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. And it's interesting on a few points. I think a lot of people are kind of regarding it as pseudo entertainment right now. It's kind of like the TV right now, lockdown television. At the same time, it is of concern to a lot of people. Some of the same people who find it funny also find it entertaining. And I wanted to kind of go into a bit of the ideology behind what's happening there and what we're really watching. Now, I'm not sure many of you saw the article Epoch Times had from Trevor Loudon just recently, talking about some of the organizations behind the current protests that we're watching. He notes in this article that one of the main groups we're seeing is actually the Freedom Road Socialists organization. And there are two different groups using the Freedom Road Socialist name. Basically, it had splintered two different organizations, one of which mostly operates on its own. The other, which is much larger, um, really is pretty active across multiple political spectrums, Communist Party USA, lots of different organizations. The consolidation of all the different main communist groups we had in the 1960s. I mean, you name it, they're part of it. And one of the main things they've done is they've gone into a lot of different communities and tried riling people up to support them for movements just like this. They were one of the groups heavily involved, for example, with the migrant caravans coming into the US. And they've targeted a lot of these communities, mainly minority communities, promoting things like race politics, to get them amped up as part of what they see as the new revolution. And so, really, you could see it as a group using minority groups, filling their heads with, class struggle, things like that, and then getting them to act out in action for different political purposes. A lot of what we're watching right now is part of that. It's not to say everyone is part of it. It's not to say that 90% of people on the street know what they're actually doing. I think most of the people out there are legitimate grassroots, just people seeing something they think they believe in and getting out and supporting it. But the people pulling the strings do appear to be heavily involved with the Freedom Road Socialists, Democratic Socialists of America, the different Antifa cells, some of the radical communist groups like the Communist Revolutionary Organizations, all of which have been very active on social media and on their own websites and platforms, talking about this as a coming revolution. Now, one of the big questions I think people have had is, okay, where does anarchy fit into this? And I think this comes from a different interpretation of how we understand political spectrums. An important thing to know is that when socialism was first coming about, the anarchists, the communists, and the socialists, and really socialism and communism, they ran under the same banner pretty much until Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution, 1917. They were used basically interchangeably, the names. They do refer to differences within the stages of achieving communism, but they were really part of the same system. Now, we saw, for example, early 1900s, late 1800s, different socialist and anarchist revolutions, attempted ones. For example, we also saw the bombing of Wall Street around that time, which was done by anarchist cells. And as I've mentioned before, one of the closest pictures we can find to what we're seeing now with this CHAZ site is probably the Paris Commune of 1871. When a group of different organizations just like this, communists, anarchists, socialists of different types, got together, seized several blocks in Paris, and established their own communist society. They went around tearing down statues, destroying art, and then eventually turned to very extreme violence, and they had to be put down with very heavy violence. It was one of the darker chapters of French history, at least in the 1800s. French nicest history when it comes to violent revolution, actually. So I think it kind of blends in with the rest. Now, getting into the idea now. Sorry, I'm just checking for comments. Getting into the idea now of socialism, communism, and anarchism. A lot of people, of course, say, well, anarchy is not socialism. It's kind of the opposite. And that really depends on how we define political spectrums. Now, when liberals talk about political spectrums and conservatives talk about political spectrums, they're talking about two completely different things. Now, how do most people on the left interpret the political spectrum? They see it as only pretty much, usually, communism on the far left, and they see Nazism or fascism on the far right. And so their entire political spectrum is interpreted within the boundaries of these two totalitarian systems. And their definition of fascism and communism is really shallow, to be honest. A lot of them, they don't think about government power. They don't think about totalitarianism. They don't think about state ownership of businesses, all of which communism, fascism, and Nazism all share. What they interpret it as is merely internationalism or nationalism. And so the line between communism and Nazism for a lot of them is very, very thin and not very well understood. A lot of conservatives, meanwhile, they would interpret the political spectrum as being a spectrum of government power. And so on the far left, you would have communism, absolute government tyranny, absolute control of all systems. And they would, of course, because of that, because it's defined as a spectrum of totalitarianism or lack of government, they would put Nazism, communism, fascism pretty much right next to each other on the far left. And on the far right, they place anarchism or libertarianism, pretty much systems that demand almost no government at all. And so when watching these types of things, a lot of people would say that, these socialists, what are they doing hanging out with these communists? Because technically socialism is the opposite of communism. But if we understand communism for what it really was, the history of this is a bit different. Now, I'll be getting to some questions in a bit. Let me just finish this thought. Now, when we look at the time of Marx, and Marx did not invent the word communism, he did not invent the idea of communism. There were many active socialist communist groups at the time of Marx. The term communism, we can go back to the Cercle Social ahead of, just before the French Revolution, one of the revolutionary societies ahead of the French Revolution, where the term came from. The man who coined the term, they called him the Rousseau of the gutter. And he was a creepy individual. I think it was Restif de Lebrun or something like that, Rousseau of the gutter. And he had a very bizarre theory. He coined the term communism, but he envisioned a system governed like a brothel. And he had some really creepy understanding of universal theory based on like animal sexuality. He was a really creepy individual. His other nickname was the pornographer, and the writings I've read from him, it seems they're only like pornographic writings, very creepy pornographic writings. The ideas around the time of Marx, you had many different groups. You had the Owenites, for example. You had the Communist Church, for example, that was promoting more of a religious form of communism. Marx was part of the more atheistic branch of communism. So, in other words, what I'm getting at is many different interpretations of it and many different branches of it. The anarchists were part of that, but they believed in achieving what they called intentional communism. So he was the father of Mary Shelley, who was the author of the book, Frankenstein. Notably, she called it the modern Prometheus. And one of the main ideas around the communists at that time was really rooted in kind of weird occult stuff. They talked about the Prometheus and Luciferianism and these types of things. I won't get into that. But really creepy beliefs. Some of them, again, were religious. Some of them were, for example, into different forms of Hegelianism, different forms of, for example, you name it, they were into. It was all whole spectrum of them. But when you get into the ideas, again, of William Godwin, personal anarchy to achieve intentional communism, what was he talking about? Now, the real idea of communism, what was it? Now, Marx talked about the 5 stages of civilization. Primitive communism, the agrarian society, the, say, height of the empire, the capitalist society. Then he talked about socialism, then communism. Socialism was the state of dictatorship. It was a dictatorship of the proletariat. It is where the government has seized control of all means of production, and a centralized power basically governs every element of society. The real communists never envisioned socialism as being a sustainable system. Socialism was designed to collapse by their own definitions. Communism comes out through what they would call the negation of the negation. the destruction of the negation or the destruction of the antithesis, if we understand it from the standpoint of Hegelian dialectics. And so when it came to communism, they believed you could bypass the state of socialism. You could bypass a state of absolute government tyranny, which would be socialism, in order to achieve personal, through personal anarchies, they called it, to achieve intentional communism. And so you don't need to have communism forced on you. You take it on yourself to internally destroy all recognition of authority, all recognition of morality, all recognition of gods and religion and values and everything. Communism is achieved through the negation, through the destruction of all previously existing institutions. And so that would be true communism. When everything is in ruins, when everything is destroyed, then you would have the true communism. And the anarchists believed they could achieve that without the need of a socialist stage. In other words, without the need of a tyrannical government to go and take it into its own hands to destroy all these things in society. We have a few questions coming in. It's from Crook's Compass Magnetic. I don't know if you remember, Josh, but our black hat friends debunked the hacked the Wuhan lab email hack story and got word to you before it got out of hand. Please cover out countryman's plight. I actually haven't heard about that. That is interesting. I can look into that. This is from Bavin Meta at Josh Phillips. Why don't you guys initiate/join/escalate boycott Chinese goods movement to hurt them economically? I suppose that is the ultimate way to collapse the CCP. So pivoting a bit, talking about the Chinese Communist Party. It's interesting right now. I really don't think the CCP, now in my analysis, I don't know if the CCP is going to survive what it's going through right now. And a lot of people, again, looking at the Chinese Communist Party and being a communist system, they don't understand how economy can play such a big role in it. Now, they interpret it as a capitalist system. There are a lot of people who think China is not a communist system. Now, you could again say that communism comes through the destruction of all previously existing institutions. And so technically it has not achieved communism. But it's more accurate to say that, again, it's a misinterpretation of what communism is. Communism is the belief. Socialism is the system that communism takes. In other words, it takes the form of socialism when practiced in government. A communist society would exist only through the destruction of that system eventually. And so when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, it's a socialist society, say dedicated to the communist idea, motivated or moved by the ideas of communism. And so this is again why you have the businesses playing such a big role in it. What is socialism? Again, it does not get rid of the capitalist systems. You could say it gets rid of the elements of free trade. It gets rid of the ability for the average person to, say, have full rights and full ability to build their own economic empires, whatever, right? What it talks about is when the government itself is able to gain full control over those systems. Again, the dictatorship of the proletariat, seizing the means of production. Communism does not get rid of the businesses. Communism does not get rid of the factories. I can't think of a single communist society, a single communist system that ever got rid of the factories, that ever got rid of the businesses. The closest you could possibly find is maybe the Khmer Rouge, where they took all the people from the cities and brought them out to the countryside and had these state-run farms where they forced people to work in the killing fields. You could argue that being an agrarian society, that was the closest thing they had to a capitalist system. And that was the only thing the government could really seize control over. Now, when it comes to China and this, yes, the communist system needs the capitalist system to survive. And basically, the Chinese regime maintains power through two things right now. They maintain power through fear and through basically censorship. In other words, controlling the ideology of the society. Is it more in your favor to just do what the government says and to move along with whatever the government wants? Or is it more in your favor to try to rebel against them? Can the government make better decisions than you can, which is the justification of a totalitarian system? And of course, that's how the Chinese regime defends itself. They say, how can we have a stable country without this totalitarian system? And then on the other hand, you also have the idea of the, say, business interest. A lot of people will not rebel because they get money from the government. They don't want to lose their pensions. They believe to some extent that the Chinese system is changing, that it's moving into this, high-tech capitalist society as they see it, controlled by a totalitarian regime. When that collapses, as it currently is, what happens? The two main holds on power for the CCP collapse. And you're already seeing local officials, say, challenging the orders of high level officials. You're already seeing people going out and, flipping over police cars, like we saw when they tried opening up Wuhan and people tried going back to work. We're already seeing people not afraid to call out the Chinese Communist Party anymore. During the lockdown of Wuhan, you saw people going on their balconies and shouting curses into the night sky against the CCP. And so, yes, I do think we're going to see a collapse of the CCP, or at the very least, a major collapse of its economic systems. And even more so, first off, you have the US-China trade war. Now you have, for example, the United States, India, even Japan, some of them paying countries, India and Japan, for example, paying countries to leave China, the US and other countries pulling out their supply chains from China. And so what does that mean for the CCP? Well, it means they're no longer going to be the manufacturing hub of the world. And at the same time, you have the US denying, for example, the sale of chips to companies like Huawei, which is going to hugely impact their whole high-tech infrastructure. Now, move on to some other questions here. We have Will Farnby. Thanks for this live. I'm really surprised this CHAZ thing is still going on. Do you think the FBI infiltrated Antifa, or Antica, I think you're going to say Antifa, BLM, etc., and are just waiting for the right moment to act? Yeah, well, according to William Barr, that's what they said they have done. And that's actually why they said they haven't carried out that many arrests of Antifa yet. I think right now the current number is the federal government has arrested about 80 people who were involved in these riots. Barr said that the reason there haven't been many arrests of Antifa is because they're trying to investigate the whole organization. And previous statements, we all remember, I'm sure, Trump talking about labeling Antifa a terrorist organization. Importantly, again, he didn't just say Antifa. They didn't just say Antifa. They said Antifa in similar organizations, which very likely could include Black Lives Matter or BLM. We'll have to see what happens. They did come out and say they're doing it. We'll have to see what happens. Yeah, and again, it's a really bizarre scene we're seeing here. Bizarre for a few different reasons. Because right now you have really a group of anarchists, socialists, and identity politics activists coming together and trying to form a society, not getting along with each other in a lot of ways. And I think that's kind of been the entertaining part for a lot of us. We're seeing, for example, their community garden and how poorly made it was. And then when they finally seem to have gotten it somewhat together, an individual goes in twirling sticks and destroys the whole thing. Now they have racial segregated gardens, allegedly. They have a blacks only garden, for example, which is ironic because, you'd think we've moved past that stage where we have to have racial segregation. But for some reason, people now interpret racial segregation as a fight against racism. It's this whole double think, like George Orwell described, where people can hold two contradictory ideas simultaneously. They think they're fighting racism, but they believe you should have segregation, racial segregation, to fight racism. But to have segregation in the first place, you need to racially profile and divide people in society according to their race, which means that you're going to put up one race and push down another based on their race. That is segregation. That is racism. They're using racism under the guise of fighting racism, and so it's again double think. They don't two contradictory ideas they're holding simultaneously. It really defines a lot of this. At the same time, too, you have big corporations, these transnational corporations coming out and supporting them, and they think they're fighting against the capitalist system, And what's going to happen too to these communities? They've gone in and burned down private businesses. They burned down some big businesses. Well, a lot of those big businesses they have insurance. A lot of those big businesses are going to get compensated for it. They're not. It doesn't hurt them. And what does it mean? It means that if they want to reopen business in that community, they no longer have the competition of small businesses. They can go in and buy up property because it's going to go at fire sale, and no pun intended, fire sale prices. They can buy it up, and you're going to have pretty much even more so a monopoly of these big corporations if they choose to even rebuild in the first place. And so again, anarchists acting under the support, I should say, of the capitalist system, thinking they're fighting against this capitalist system. You have anarchists believing they're fighting against big government, but really a lot of the governments that really a lot of the left really advocate for big government, and they're the ones supporting them. They think they're going to get rid of big government by instituting big government or calling for big government programs. If you look at the demands of these groups, the only way you could achieve those demands is through much, much bigger government. They couldn't be achieved without big government. And so again, double think, two contradictory ideas, and they believe they're fighting against the things that they're actually advocating for. Moving on, this is from Jamie Cobb. Does anyone think they will try this in other American cities? Referring to the CHAZ site. Yeah, they're trying it in Portland right now. Andy No, he's an independent journalist. He's been posting a lot of videos about this. He's one of the more prominent reporters when it comes to covering Antifa. He's posted a lot of videos showing these different groups trying to establish the same thing in Portland. For example, the first videos we saw were of them moving fencing, trying to block off roads. They backed off it, allegedly, according to Andy No. These different, say, activists left the site on their own voluntarily. They didn't keep doing it. Some of the latest reports I've seen on that is they're trying it again, and the police are moving in to block them. When it comes down to it, the only way you could have these CHAZ sites or these TAZ sites, whatever you want to call them, get set up, and I can explain what that means. The only way you could have these set up is if the local government supports it. And so in Seattle, the local government is supporting Summer of Love, as they're calling it. The governor actually criticized Trump for calling on him to do something about it. Portland, I wouldn't be surprised if the local government actually supported it, but it does seem they're having the police break it up. And you're seeing a lot of weird politics right now on that note, because you're seeing, for example, these very extreme groups calling for very extreme things. And you're seeing a lot of the more centrist Democrats trying to distance themselves from some of the more extreme elements. For example, Bernie Sanders, Biden, a lot of them are saying that they don't want to defund the police. It makes sense for Bernie. He's a socialist. Socialism exists through the use of force. You need to have a police force, a very strong police force, for socialism to work. Otherwise, how can you coerce people to pay your crazy taxes? A fun thing to ask a lot of these people is, well, what do you think the government should do to me if I refuse to go along with your system? Because socialism, these totalitarian forms of government, only work through use of force. You can't have them without use of force. High taxation without an enforcement system is just philanthropy. You know, what are they going to do if you refuse to pay taxes? They're going to send people with guns to your door, and they're going to drag you off to their prisons or their gulags. They can't have socialism without a totalitarian police force. And so again, of course, Bernie supports not defunding the police, not saying our police are in any way totalitarian. Personally, my own perspective, I think one of the most dangerous things we face right now with the idea of defunding police is not that they want to get rid of the police. It's that they want to put something else in its place. Police in America, they're sworn to protect the Constitution. The reason we haven't had a lot of these totalitarian, say, gun grabs and things like that is because the sheriff's departments in a lot of places refuse to support it. They refuse to enforce it. And so a lot of these measures governments would want to put into place, local police forces that have sworn to uphold the Constitution will not enforce them. For example, when Barack Obama was talking about making these gun grab laws, you had a lot of local sheriff's departments say they will not enforce it. And so you had pushback from local police. Not to say they're all good, they do have their issues, but for the most part, you can't enforce a lot of these things if the police don't align with it, if they're refusing to enforce it. And so what are they doing now? They're calling for the abolition of these police departments and creating really a new policing system that we have no idea what is as of now. Moving on, this is from Hakeem Muhammad. Do you have a clue what might come after the CCP is gone? I don't. And, this ties into a bigger picture of what we're seeing now. you're seeing a lot of different groups throwing their cards on the table because a lot of different groups want to be the power that subverts the process of change. This ties into chaos operations. One of the topics I wanted to go into in this chat, anyways. What are chaos operations? It's a few different things. When you get into government interest, it is the creation of the illusion of chaos. When you get into, for example, Soviet, what they would call ideological subversion campaigns, they talk about destabilization, demoralization to stabilization. Great writer on this, and he did some videos as well, Yuri Bezmenov. He wrote a book called Love Letter to America, and he's, of course, done these viral videos. He's no longer around, unfortunately. But he did these viral videos talking about this. His book, Love Letter to America, you can find it public domain now. It's well worth reading. He talks about the 4 stages of subversion, ideological subversion. The first stage is demoralization. You make the local population unwilling to stand up for their rights. You start infiltrating and whittling away the institutions that make a society function. You destroy faith in the police. You destroy racial harmony. You destroy faith in government. You destroy the religious institutions that create the values of society. You get into the culture and you turn it into something that has a negative impact on the, say, moral foundations and cultural stability of the society, or you promote cultures that support the movement or revolution you want to create. After you've demoralized it, you then move in to destabilize it. And so you begin causing unrest. You begin making things not function as they should. You want the police to not enforce the laws. You want to have good people instead of bad people be the target of law enforcement. You want to have double standards with laws. You want to make it so that people who do something that, for example, supports the beliefs of this system, for example, right now, ironically, a lot of the big media, CNN, they're defending people open carrying rifles in this CHAZ zone. Yeah. Why are these media and politicians, importantly, supporting this group that are carrying around guns and calling for open revolution, and even calling for violence against police? Why are these groups that normally oppose firearms and Second Amendment rights supporting that? And why are they criticizing still people who do support the Second Amendment normally? Well, it's because it fits their political interests. And so this is again part of the destabilization process. You want to have these double standards. You want to have double standards of enforcement. You want to make the institutions of society serve the opposite function of what they're meant to. And so that is the destabilization. Eventually, you want to bring society to conflict, open conflict. You want to have people fighting in the streets. You want to have riots. You want to have people burning down buildings. Again, this is Soviet era tactics. This is what they did. And then after there's all this chaos, after all this craziness during the open conflict state, possibly even civil war state, you then bring in normalization. You bring in this restabilization, this introduction of a new power or system. Because when people see that, they feel that nothing of their society functions anymore. When they believe that all the institutions of the society serve the opposite function of what they should, when they believe that government is corrupt, when they believe that there's no such thing, when they believe the police are acting against their interests and for their interests, they want a reorganizing of society. And it's through that system of chaos, again, chaos operations, that groups pulling the strings behind all these things. And again, I mentioned Freedom Road Socialists. They're tied in heavily, one of the branches at least, tied in heavily with Communist Party USA. Even some foreign governments, for example, some of these organizations support Maoist groups, which means a lot of them were loyal to the Chinese Communist Party. For example, one of the big names in Freedom Road Socialists is based in Wuhan. In fact, one of the guys who orchestrated a lot of their community outreach in these communities right now we're seeing is based in Wuhan, China. They're open about these things in their own websites. And so again, if you want to orchestrate these things, you want to create this open chaos, you want to destabilize things, you want to bring it to the state of chaos, of open conflict, and then destroy it. And then once you bring it to the state where people want change bad enough, they will accept whatever form of government you want to institute. And that is the process of what they call normalization. And so applied to China as well, you have a lot of different groups putting their cards down on the table, I believe, because they want to subvert the process. They want, again, Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Observe a process in motion. How do you alter that process? How do you change the trajectory of an outcome so that it fits your interests rather than the one it was heading towards normally? Many different groups putting their cards down on the table. Personally, I have faith that something good will happen in China. I believe the Chinese people are very smart. And I know, for example, things like the Tweedong movement, they call the quitting the CCP movement, quitting the party movement, for example, yeah, it translates to. There are people now in China, they're not dumb, they're very smart people. They know what communism is. They know what the CCP is. They know they don't want a system like that. And they're also distrustful of a lot of international organizations as well. What kind of system will a people like that create? I think we'll have to see. I do think, again, a lot of groups are interested in subverting that process. And again, based on the stuff I just explained, I think that's what we're also seeing right now with the chaos in the United States. This process, I doubt Trump would do it at the federal level, but at the state level, you can do it. And we'll see how far they can push it. Really, that's what started the Civil War was, the argument between state rights and, federal rights. Can states have slavery, which goes against the whole basis of a free society? When the federal government opposes it, and they said you can't trample our rights, the federal government stepped in and said, yeah, we can. How far can you push things before these local government officials get called out for not enforcing laws, for not defending their citizens, for not defending property and businesses, for not enforcing basic law, for example, while supporting anarchists, terrorists, some of them, while supporting people really going on the streets, beating people up, lighting buildings on fire? To what degree do you allow them to do it before a foreign force like the federal government needs to step in? Trump, of course, has been threatening to send the military in. Will he do that? I don't know. I don't think it would work for him well for the 2020 elections, and I think it's like walking on glass. Personally, I think the method they will take, and they are taking, is to use federal investigations, terrorist investigations, to basically dig out the whole networks. Because if they really are investigating Antifa as they say they are, and if they really are getting into that, you're looking at a whole network that ties to this whole movement of subversion. Democratic Socialists of America, for example, came out with a report or paper shortly before these whole things, talking about how they would be coordinating national anti-fascist operations. They created a centralized system to coordinate operations like this. Again, Freedom Road Socialists is doing this openly. Freedom Road Socialists, Democratic Socialists of America, tied to all kinds of institutions in the US, both of which coordinating these Antifa operations. How deep will these investigations the Trump administration is launching go? Well, they could take down, if they really are going to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization, and similar movements, because a lot of these groups don't operate under the banner of Antifa directly. We'll have to see where it goes. There's a lot they could do. How far they'll take it, we'll have to see. This is from Parabellum. On November 19, 2019, our arsonists attacked the Epoch Times in Hong Kong. What makes you think your organization is safe from the combined forces of the CCP and Antifa in New York City and/or LA? Yeah, so right during the height of the Hong Kong protests, masked individuals came into now Epoch Times were blacklisted in mainland China. We do have offices in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Some people have been asking what's going to happen to Epoch Times in Hong Kong now that the Chinese Communist Party has put into place these national security laws where they can enforce mainland laws in Hong Kong, basically getting rid of this whole, autonomy that Hong Kong is supposed to have. If they went after Epoch Times for not too hard, it would look very bad on the CCP, on the international, from this perspective of the international, governments. Will they do that? I wouldn't put it beyond them right now. We'll have to see. Again, during the Hong Kong protests, you had masked individuals go into the printing press, this building operated by Epoch Times to print our newspapers, and they set it on fire. More recently, we had just actually a few days ago, one of our staff members, an individual tried attacking, I can't remember if it was him or her, with a knife. Luckily, a person just standing by intervened and actually stopped the person from, possibly killing one of our staff members. The person who intervened grabbed the knife and actually injured their hand really bad. We did some interviews with that person. They said they don't regret it. Really pretty heroic act, if you ask me. How can we prevent these groups from attacking us outside of China? We'll have to see. Now, we actually do have a reporter at the CHAZ site right now. One of our reporters, Bowen, I can't remember his last name, but you can see me retweeting some of his tweets on my Twitter. Go to Josh J. Philipp, Philipp. He is there. He's pretty much just doing non-biased reporting. He actually interviewed that Raz guy, this rapper, so-called warlord, who who tried taking control of the CHAZ site. He has a video up. Actually, he talks about the guy has a gun on him while he's talking. He's pretty much just been posting videos of what's happening there. We'll have to see. They haven't really threatened us or anything like that. We haven't had problems yet. We'll have to see. Now, moving on. Right. So, reminder from one of my editors: we're gonna be launching a Patreon. Yeah, we're gonna be launching a Patreon soon. YouTube has been heavily censoring this channel. I mean, more so lately. Not clear why they're doing it. Maybe they don't like the topics we're covering. Unfortunately, if you want to cover anything of significance, you're probably going to get censored on YouTube these days. If you want to talk about the Wuhan corona, the virus in China, this CCP virus we're talking about, they're going to censor you. You want to talk about Antifa, they're going to censor you. Some media have talked about how if they put Antifa in their headlines or titles, they get censored. If you call out some of the medical practices that the WHO has backed, if you call them out or question them, they can delete your videos. The head of YouTube said this publicly. And so, yes, Crossroads has been getting heavily censored lately. Not just it appears possibly getting throttled in terms of them saying cutting back on how much they will promote our videos in their own platform, which means folks like you promoting this channel really is the main way we can spread, but also denying ads on a lot of our videos. A lot of our videos are demonetized, which means we can't really make money on YouTube. And so we're launching a Patreon. Keep an eye out for that. And also, we're going to be doing these live videos now as well. So, yeah, you're here as well, right? Moving on to some different questions. This is from Voyatech, CYVR. Good afternoon, Joshua. I have doubt that CCP will collapse. You have to agree that they have access to huge amounts of money. Soviet circles of communist countries were left with no money. That is true. And now there's a couple points to it. The Chinese Communist Party can print its own money. A lot of Chinese analysts, economists, they pointed out that the Chinese economy is basically a big Ponzi scheme. They can print all the money they want, and then on the international level, they can say it's worth whatever they want. They do their 3.5 economic outlook every year. And a lot of economists have called it out saying, yeah, like we know based on, for example, satellite imagery, a lot of the factories are what they call zombie factories. They turn on the lights and they don't produce anything. They're creating these ghost cities because they need to keep people working. They can subsidize and give state money through state banks, centralized banking systems, to all these different, say, construction projects that nobody will ever live in. They're just keeping people working. They're keeping money flowing internally in their own economy. The Chinese Communist Party can say the yuan is worth whatever it wants. They can say the renminbi is worth whatever they want. And there's no way of calling them out on it. The question is, to what degree can they keep people inside China working? The question is, to what degree can they keep the people from revolting? The question is, if the, say, China 2025 dream, the different ambitions they had, Project 863, for example, China 2025, the push for the Chinese regime to become the global economic leader, if all of that fails, if the whole Chinese high-tech industry fails and they're still the manufacturing hub of the world, and in addition to losing the high-tech industry, they're also losing the manufacturing hub. I mean, what are you going to have when people don't have jobs? What are you going to have when people they're not producing anything? When you don't have the ability to create internal flow for their economy. Fair enough. Maybe the CCP could keep things afloat by, putting more money into their system. Maybe they can do it. We'll have to see. Personally, I don't think it's going to work for them. Now, remember, the Soviets were people interpreted the Soviet Union as basically the same thing. It is true a lot of the diaspora of the Soviet Union was going bankrupt. The Chinese Communist Party didn't go under, North Korea didn't go under, Cuba didn't go under, Plenty of them did not go under. So the Soviets there were still a lot of communist systems that did not go under despite all that. The other problem you had, actually, on another note, which I think people have to really watch with China, is one of the reasons why we had this, you know, geez. Let me step back. What happened after the Soviet Union collapsed? Well, you had the people who were the people who had money in the Soviet Union. It was the Communist Party members, pretty much. That was about it. And so when the Communist Party collapsed, who had the money, who didn't? It was the Communist Party members who had all the money. And so what do? Of course, they go and buy up land, they go and buy up factories, they go and buy up all the real estate and property. Ironically, because they claim to be against private ownership, right? Because they claim to be against being landlords. They go and buy up all the private property, go and buy up all the real estate. And then the same people who ran the government before the communist system collapsed still run the whole system. Then you had the KGB go and form the Russian mafia. And so pretty much gangsters still being gangsters, and pretty much corrupt government creating a new form of corrupt government. Hopefully we'll see the Chinese system learn from that and hopefully put something else in place. I mean, it could be messy. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Moving on, we got from my editor, feel free to drink water. Thank you. Yeah. One sec. Yeah, so for these lives, we'll probably do, I don't know, we'll see. Maybe half an hour, maybe an hour. We'll have to see. I'm used to doing the broadcast. We have to keep topic to topic. So this whole question answer format's a bit new to me. Again, folks, if you have questions, feel free to send them to me. It's from Jeremy Wallace. What can us viewers do to help gather proof/intel about the censorship of this channel, NTD, China in Focus, and the Epoch Times? For viewers, geez, I mean, it's hard to say because YouTube is so slippery with it. Some channels they actually send you notifications directly. China Uncensored, for example, they got a note from YouTube telling them that their video, for example, they denied ads in the video, telling them that their video didn't actually violate the community standards of YouTube, but they're going to censor it anyways. And so how can a video that doesn't violate any of the stated standards still get censored? They'll email you and they'll tell you this. With us on Crossroads, we get emails saying your video has been demonetized. Here's how they do it a lot of times. A lot of the channels on YouTube comes in through the initial views. A lot of your views come in within like the first 24 hours. We do get kind of ongoing views on some videos, but really for most channels, it's first 24 hours is the most important time, because especially if you're covering breaking news, if you're going into the day's news, people don't want to watch, they don't usually want to watch older videos. And so first 24 hours, if you want to talk about anything useful, those are going to be your views. And so YouTube will automatically restrict your advertisements within that time frame if you talk about anything controversial. And then you have to request manual review from YouTube, which might take like 2 days. And so when the manual review is over, then they might re-enable ads. By that time, you're pretty much not going to make any money on the ads anyways, or on that video, or at the very least, much, much less than what you would have otherwise. They tell you these things. They send us emails telling us this. And we can go on the back end and we can actually look at which videos have ads and which ones don't. When it comes to them, and so in other words, YouTube is open about it. And then sometimes they'll even say, if they do the manual review, they'll tell us, your video has been approved for ads, or they'll say it's been denied for ads. For example, they just emailed me this morning, saying they did a manual review and one of them, at least one of them for sure, is not going to get advertisement. So they do that. They're open about it. The other way that they can restrict views, a few different things. People who subscribe get unsubscribed automatically. It seems it's hard to prove whether YouTube is doing that intentionally or if it's a bug. A lot of channels report this. We've had a lot of viewers on this channel report it. A lot of people saying as well that they click the notification bell to get notifications, but they end up not getting notifications. This happens as well. So if you've subscribed to Epoch Time, if you subscribe to Crossroads, see if you're still subscribed. See if you're getting your notifications. If you've clicked the notification bell. China Uncensored, for example, they don't even ask people to click the notification bell anymore. because they say people just don't get the notifications. So that's another way they censor you. Another one is that YouTube has its own SEO, basically. And so typically, if you have good SEO, if you have good keywords, you're going to get served by YouTube through, recommended videos, or, the right hand column where you have different videos related to what you're watching. You're going to get served on those. YouTube can restrict those. They can control those. And so if they don't like your channel, if they don't like what you're talking about, they can just make it so people don't see your channel unless they go directly to it, unless people click directly to it. It's hard to prove that. If you all want to help, figure this out, I don't know how to prove that. If they're doing that to us, we can see on our traffic, for example, it almost seems without a doubt they're doing it to us. But again, if you really want to help, we are going to set up a Patreon soon to hopefully deal with the finances. Again, really need your support on that if you folks can. I know things aren't easy right now. Also, if you really want to help, share these videos, tell your friends or family about it, because if we're not being served as recommended videos, if we're not being served on the right-hand column on YouTube, pretty much that's one of the biggest ways they can censor us as well, because it means we never grow. It means that people who, if you want to watch it, you have to go manually to the Crossroads page and watch it. And so you're not going to find it organically. You have to already know the channel exists. So if you can really want to support us, tell a friend or family member about it, or share the videos. Anything really helps. A few other questions. This is from Health Babe. The world has been in very chaotic situation. Do you see any government official that will do the right thing to put the world back to real normal? If so, can we trust them? I mean, it's complicated. It's complicated. And even some government officials who seemed to be heading that way, it's not clear whether they're still going to do it. Trump says he's going to do it. We'll have to see. People ask my political views are. To be honest, I don't vote. I don't plan to vote. As a journalist, I believe people should vote. As a journalist, I don't believe I should. As a journalist, I believe it makes me have less personal stake in politics. And so I want to try to look at things as objectively as possible. That's just my stance personally. It's fair to say my values are maybe more conservative, but I do try to look at both sides of things. And I think people want that. I think people want me to not be, as a journalist, just my assumption. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think people want to get the facts. They want me to, I suspect a lot of you want me to just tell you what's going on, and you can decide for yourself if you like it or not. So I'll tell you what the left is saying. I'll tell you what the right is saying. Do you like it or not? That's your call. Personally, when it comes to Trump, I do think he's done a lot of things that roll back a lot of the big government programs. I do think he's doing a lot of things that help roll a lot of what's been done back. We'll see how it goes. He's talking right now about trying to deal with these local government officials. Can he do it? I'm not sure. Not unless he took very extreme action. I mean, he's talked about using the military. Will he do that? I don't know. And even then, if the media is all against him, they'll say anything. A lot of them are politically aligned. How does that affect the 2020 elections? And then 2020 gets lost to people pushing for these things. I mean, is it going to be worse off? Probably. So hard to say. Bolsonaro in Brazil came out saying he was going to change things. I've heard a lot of good things about what he's doing. The media is very biased there as well, so it's actually hard to get a good feeling of what's happening. He did kind of pivot more towards China for a while, and I think they're suffering a bit from that. We'll have to see. Same thing with the Philippines and Duterte. He was wanting to align with the U.S. Trump criticized him for his policing methods on for example, fighting the drugs, because he's killing a lot of the drug organizations. Take it for what you will. You like what he's doing, you don't like what he's doing. I know that in the Philippines, I have a friend, for example, from the same hometown as Duterte, and he said this is the situation. Growing up there, you had communist movements there killing police on sight. They killed police on sight. He said that growing up, you'd see bodies floating in the river and you wouldn't even feel anything because you were so used to seeing it. And because they had kill on sight rules for the police, a lot of the police killed the anarchists or communists on sight too. And so you had extreme violence. And this is where Duterte grew up. And so for a lot of Filipinos, they see that these groups basically act with impunity. They kill on sight, they do whatever they want. And so he created this system of policing that is also pretty brutal. Um, like it, don't like it, you recall, Trump criticized him for it. And after he criticized him for it, Duterte he really started pivoting more towards China. And I think the Philippines has been suffering a bit because of that, personally. Moving on to some other questions, we have John Funk. Why is it not possible to arrest the elected officials for aiding and abetting the anarchist groups by not fulfilling their sworn purpose of upholding the law in their jurisdictions? And that's a good question. In New York, we're seeing something interesting where the governor and the mayor are not seeing eye to eye. Governor Cuomo, New York governor, is actually saying that he has the ability to remove de Blasio from office if he chose to. He said it's a long process, he might not do it. He said that when when de Blasio refused to have the National Guard deployed in New York. Um, it's hard to say. There are, for example, I think 6 different states now have local petitions calling for the removal of local governments. When it comes to this terrorist investigation, or sorry, the investigation into Antifa and the alleged designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization, if you want to get into groups that have aided and abated them, yeah, actually, some government officials probably could be taken down through that. Will Trump do that? We'll have to see. If he did that, it would look like a coup. It would look like he's taking out his political opponents, because you have a lot of government officials who are part of these different organizations. You have a lot of their fun people get their finances from who are part of these organizations. A lot of the grassroots of the far left they're part of these organizations. How far the Trump administration will go, we'll have to see. Can they do it? Yes, they could, very likely. And we have from Rob Craven. You think a civil war could be coming in America? I hope not, personally. Um, we'll have to see, to be honest. Yeah, this is a complicated one. I don't think it would work too well for a lot of the left, because it tends to be the right that supports the Second Amendment. It tends to be the right wing that is better armed. We are seeing some extreme groups on the left now getting guns and carrying guns. For example, on this CHAZ site, you have a lot of people with guns. Oh, real quick, John Funk, yeah, thank you for the donation. Really appreciate it. Just got a note here. Yeah, really, really appreciate it. Back to this idea of the Civil War. I mean, hard to say. I'm thinking of a few different factors that would come into play. What would a civil war look like in the United States? There have been I've read some articles actually talking about red team operations the military has done on possible civil war scenarios in the US. One of the biggest problems they talk about is, first off, perception when it comes to media, when it comes to supply lines within the US, different cities, when it comes to critical infrastructure, for example, the electric grid and the ability to hit that. When it comes to how would we define who is conservative or liberal? You could suspect a lot of the military, for example, Marines, Army, at least they tend to be more conservative. Air Force, Navy, mixed. You have a lot of people who are more liberal in the Navy, I've been told. How many of them, even if they don't align politically with it, would support a war on the citizenry of the US? And so, would the federal government be involved in the Civil War, or would it look more like open chaos, where you have on the grassroots level, let's say, liberals and conservatives killing each other? Will it get to that point? I hope not. I personally don't think it would happen. Again, we'll have to see. Then the other big picture is, would you have foreign intervention? For example, would the United Nations or Interpol or these groups want to send in peacekeepers to help deal with it? You can only do that if the federal government would allow them in. I don't think Trump would do that personally. And so personally, for now, I don't think we're at any risk of a civil war. I do think we're at risk of race riots. I do think those are coming to an end to an extent. Will we see an expansion of these CHAZ sites? I think we'll see attempts at it. It will only happen again if the local governments support it. They can only establish these CHAZ sites if the local government allows it to happen. Otherwise, they're going to call in the National Guard and take care of it. And if it gets to be too much, I do think Trump would deploy the military like he's talked about. If it came to be too much of an issue where it starts to destabilize the whole country. So personally, right now, I don't think we're going to see a civil war. All right. So again, I think we've gone quite a while now, so I should probably wrap it up. We're going to be doing these lives every Sunday, 4 p.m. So if you have questions you want to bring in, of course, let us know in the chat. Tune in again next week, 4 p.m. Eastern time, same channel. And of course, we do broadcast 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Again, really appreciate you all. And again, we're launching a Patreon. So if you folks want to join our Patreon, you want to support this channel, again, we really need your support. We can't make money on YouTube pretty much right now. So, your donations are what keep this channel going. So you want to support us, go to Patreon. Again, really support it. Really appreciate it. And just as a personal note, I read your comments. I don't always comment on the live streams. I do read them. And, you folks are great. I love reading your comments. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the support. I think you're a great crowd. I enjoy it. So, I'm here for you too. So anyways, that said, again, take care of yourselves, stay healthy, stay safe. Crazy times we're in. So yeah, legitimately take care of yourselves. And again, 4 p.m. Eastern time next week, Monday through Friday, again, broadcasting normal shows. Thanks again. See you next time.